and that she can only be an enabler for dual DPS compositions. Now, my words is we'll go over it and react.
Not the only enabler, she still works in a hyper-carried setup.
All in all, Ruan Mei will add much more flexibility when creating your potential hyper-carry and dual carry teams.
Ruan Mei is, in truth, pretty broken. I have no idea how they just let this character release in her current state, because the amount of buffs she gives makes your team basically 5 characters instead of 4. So
Picture this, you were a HSR player back in version 1.6, Ruan Mei just came out and all of your favorite CCs and guide makers, and basically everyone on the entire planet saying that she's a broken unit, she's a mass pull unit, and she's a future-proof support that will basically last forever. Now fast forward to 1.5 years later, here we are today with Ruan Mei's clear speed and versatility being challenged by multiple supports, performing faster and having better clears for pretty much all of the endgame content. Ruan Mei at this point is also more or less dedicated to the break team, and even that is getting sort of challenged with Fuke. So what exactly happened? Was the entire community wrong? Did Ruan Mei get power crap? To be fair, it's not really the case, but also kind of the case, and we will explore the Ruan Mei Fallacy today. As the journey through Teva reaches near its final chapter with Snatch Naya on the horizon, it's the perfect time for a new adventure. And what better way to dive into something fresh than with Once Human, the most anticipated free open world mobile game arriving this April with absolutely no pay to win. With an IGN rating of 8 out of 10, the mobile version brings you the same experience as the original PC game, giving you a whole new way to explore. If you're looking for a darker Genshin Impact, Once Human could be your next destination. Step into a stunning post-apocalyptic world where you can explore vast landscapes, battle strange monsters, and craft your very own gear and bases. Raise your deviation powers and turn them into your best companions. The freedom is endless and the adventure is just the beginning. Are you ready to jump in? Click on the link below to unlock exclusive gold cosmetics and enter the lucky draw. Plus, special rewards await PC players on Steam where you can seamlessly connect with the mobile experience. Start your Once Human journey now. First things first, to establish Ruan Mei's Fallacy, we need to explore what Ruan Mei as a unit actually represents in HSR, right? So at a glance, for the launch, Ruan Mei's kit has been virtually untouched, as has been the case for pretty much every single HSR support. No unit has ever underwent changes ever since their launch. Ruan Mei herself as a kit, to kind of summarize what she does exactly, she has a 25% res pen, 68% damage buff, assuming you get to 160 break effect on the stat screen, 20% additional break effect, 50% weakness break efficiency, 10% speed, and an additional 120% ice break damage, as well as the 10 Toblin Rebloom, right? So as a whole for Ruan Mei's kit at launch, it looks pretty stacked up. It's not like she's specifically tied to any attack DPS because all of them looks pretty universal, but what stands out the most as a support herself is gonna be the weakness rate efficiency as of this current point of time. And as of this current moment, unless you got a E1 Fuke, Ruan Mei is the only unit in the game that allows us to buff this weakness rate efficiency, which brings us into the Ruan Mei Fallacy itself. This fallacy essentially states, in my opinion anyways, a unit that is viable with everyone is not going to be optimal for everyone. It might sound like a little bit of a conundrum because technically Ruan Mei is going to be optimal with your break teams, but let me just expand this down a little bit further, right? So what I mean by saying this is sort of tying back to one of the things that I've been establishing since day one of main content for HSR. Viable is not the same as optimal. And playing this game for the past 2 years, it's pretty clear that HSR has moved quite far away from the traditional team building in a sense where you want to focus on universal power, flexibility. Because in the version 1 days of HSR, a lot of the teams are pretty straightforward. You essentially basically a hyper carry, you more or less had a DOT, and we didn't even have things like super break. So Ruan Mei was only really just there for you to be given to hyper carry supports. And dual DPS was like what? Topaz and ratio, sort of, right? Fast forward to this day, the teams are a lot more defined. You have a much more clear-cut perspective as to which teams are going to be made up with which units. You have your follow-up team comp with Robin and Fei Xiao. You have your Aircron team comp with Jiao Qiu. You have your Sunday summons with Jingyuan and pretty much every of the summon DPS. Aglea with Sunday and Babin. Counter team comp with Ying Li. RMC is just performing absolutely out of the world. Super Raid is going to be Super Raid. And DOT, let's just be real, it hasn't really gotten any update for a while now. What I mean to say is, ever since version 1 up until at this point version 3, team comps, especially with the introduction of Mighty, because of the fact that they are getting more and more defined, a support being a universal support, whether or not they're going to be universal for all these different team comps, it should no longer be the main concern for a player when it comes to pulling for a support. And this is going to be the Ruan Mei Fallacy. Because back then, when players pulled for Ruan Mei, especially at launch in version 1.6, one of, if not the most important selling points for Ruan Mei is going to be how universal she was. I'm pretty sure everyone has for you saying how universal this unit was when it comes to, you can pretty much use her with every single hyper carry. Winner's Brave efficiency is very, very good. Rest pen is very, very good. And the enemies are going to get broken faster. You can basically, sustain a little bit better since they're not going to be hitting you as much. So this standpoint of whether or not Ruan Mei was universal, it has been tied to the viability of herself as a unit and as to whether or not players should even pull for her, right? Okay, she's a universal support. Therefore, since she's working with every single team I have right now, I should be getting this unit. To an extent, this is definitely going to be true, especially since version 1. Because version 1, if you did not pull for Ruan Mei, who else were you not going to pull, right? At the end of the day, for Honkai Starbucks, it is always going to be about opportunity cost. And back then, for version 1.6, you really didn't have any other units close to Ruan Mei's banner, either 1.5 or even 1.7 or even 2.0, where they could rival Ruan Mei's strength when it comes to the performance increase for that period of time, right? For that generation of DPS, for the generation of team comps. But fast forward to this day, in version 3, if you decide to pull for Ruan Mei right now, whether or not she was universal is no longer going to be the case. A player that wants to pull for Ruan Mei, or specifically a support that's going to be deemed as universal, you should look into it from a perspective of, can she make this team comp the best it could possibly be without factoring in the factors of whether or not she could work with a multitude of different team comps. Now, the reason why this is so important and why I want to bring up this Ruan Mei Fallacy is because we are at a stage where our supply far outweighs the demand. And I've been saying this for the past couple of videos, especially since the whole power creep thing, how it induces FOMO. We have a lot of different units in HSR, but at the end of everything, we only have a 2-team content for every single endgame content we have, right? You build a team 1 of 4, team 2 of 4, and these 2 teams, assuming that you build them up properly, you level their tracers, level their light cones, you pretty much can use them to clear majority, if not all, of the endgame with more or less satisfactory results, right? Granted, there are some teams that are going to take more work than others. Let's just be real, Blade, right? Some teams are going to take more work like DOT compared to the unit on Raid Up, the units that are being shielded as of this current moment, such as, for example, D, Herta, and Aglea, and very soon Mighty. But that is kind of beside the point. The point is this: if you know that HSR, team building, at the end of the day is going to be using 8 different units, and you want to continuously using the same 8 units, assuming that you do not want to diversify, you do not want to build a brand new team of 8, right? A brand new team of 4 maybe, right? Then you need to really consider how flexible or how viable it is. This value of flexibility, is it going to impact your account as a player if you want to make sure that this team survives throughout all of the endgame content? The Ruan Mei Fallacy basically leads to a situation where a support unit that's going to be universal for a lot of these different archetypes, they are not going to be able to be the best in slot. And I sort of touched on this a little bit on my final thoughts with Tribbie. Tribbie, in my opinion, she is somewhat reminiscent of this Ruan Mei Fallacy in a sense where right now, in this current state of point, she is going to be very viable for almost every single team, because the environment right now, it is tailor-made not for Tribbie specifically, but for this kind of evolution content where there's going to be a boss and they're going to summon a lot of mobs, and all these mobs are going to allow Tribbie's access, get additional energy for more follow-up attacks, build up the energy ultimate, build up Duns. It is very, very synergistic for these kind of multi-target content. So in this case, Tribbie could be said to be viable, and whether or not she is going to be suffering from the Ruan Mei Fallacy depends on if Tribbie has a best in slot niche comp. So I think we first need to establish that yes, Ruan Mei is technically viable with pretty much every single team, even till this day. If you want to use Ruan Mei with DOT, sure. If you want to use Ruan Mei with even hyper carry, sure. Or maybe even face out follow up or even Unity, they technically could be viable, but there would be a much better alternative in the form of either Sunday, Robin, Jiao Qiu, or in this case, Tribbie, and brand new release or even Remembrance Trailblazer, right? So with that being established, what exactly is Ruan Mei competing with? Or what exactly does this Ruan Mei Fallacy mean for a player if you're thinking about pulling for supports in the future? Because I feel that because we have established this premise that team comps are getting more and more niche in HSR, a player cannot build every single team, especially not a free-to-play player or low spender that wants to play with the shiny new team, the brand new archetype every single time something new comes out, because eventually you're going to lose a 50-50, you're going to lose, you're going to run out of strategies, and you can no longer pull for these brand new archetypes. And when this scenario happens, looking back into your roster right now, does a universal support bring you more value compared to a more specialized support to a specialized team comp? And I feel that, generally speaking, an excellent comparison is going to be, do you think Ruan Mei brings you more value in all these different teams? Or do you think Sunday brings you more value in, for example, a Jingyuan team? And I think the answer to this is very obvious. I'm not saying this like Sunday is better than Ruan Mei or Ruan Mei is better than Sunday, but the mindset of basically going into HSR's future, viability for multiple team comps should not be a player's priority. And this is most likely going to become even more prominent with the release of Castris and Nexa going forward into the future, because team comps are going to be more and more plentiful. At this point, we haven't even realized what exactly is Remembrance all about yet, right? Remembrance could be a DPS like Aglaia, Remembrance could be a support like Mimi, Remembrance could be a goddamn sustain for all we know. And you can see that as more and more team comps get introduced in the future, what exactly are the chances that Ruan Mei is going to synergize with them as compared to a brand new support that's going to be coming out in the same version? I would say if I was a betting man, most likely that wouldn't be the case. It is quite unlikely that a Ruan Mei, this support that is going to be released back in version 1.6, is going to be more synergistic, more optimal compared to a version 3 support that is coming out in these few recent patches for the version 3 DPSs and the version 3 team comp archetypes, right? At this point, I feel that it can also be argued that, you know, if you did pull for Ruan Mei, did you waste your Stellar Jades? Was it a waste? Because technically, the newer and newer team comps are going to be able to do, perform far more exceptional compared to the older team comps. Which, at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with that, right? At the end of the day, HP inflation, on top of that, they are wanting to sell the mechanics in order to make players feel that, okay, these new archetypes with these new environments, they're going to be performing exceptionally well, and my older team, older supports, older DPS, they are not going to be performing as well, which is normal, which is completely normal. But whether or not it's a waste, you need to remember why you put Ruan Mei in the first place. If you put Ruan Mei since 1.6, I would argue that the improvement Ruan Mei have brought to your account would have been pretty substantial compared to if you did not put Ruan Mei back in version 1.6. Because you shouldn't be comparing Ruan Mei's value as a support as of right now compared to the version 3 units. You should be comparing what she has brought to you back when you first put her last time. Because if you didn't put Ruan Mei, what would you have put? Argenti? Huo, maybe Boothill, Sparkle, Black Swan, and all these contenders with Ruan Mei, I would say that very few of them ever come close to the value that she's provided. Not to mention, she technically helped us pivot back into Super Break, which is going to be an archetype that Ruan Mei benefited tremendously from, right? Despite the fact that few came out eventually later on, right? We introduced more exo toughness, more Super Break scaling. Ruan Mei may or may not work super well with a sustained team comp, right? So you could make an argument, okay, I could technically not use Ruan Mei and I just run Fugue with Harmony Trailblazer and like a Gallagher. It technically could work, but I would say that Ruan Mei Fugue is still going to be performing quite nicely since the additional Winner's Proficiency is going to be very, very comfortable, especially for content such as Apocalypse Shadows, right? If it comes to a sustainless team comp, then Fugue, Ruan Mei, and Harmony Trailblazer, they also work very, very well. So at least Ruan Mei technically has a home. But this home that is going to be Super Break, you can see that Super Break's performance is not going to be as exceptional as compared to others anymore, compared to last time, right? You see a Super Break in Pride Win, the performance for all of the endgame content, they have been clearing slower compared to Aircron, compared to follow-up, compared to right now the brand new D-Herda and Aglaia, and very likely when Mighty comes out, when Casuals come out, Super Break might not be as strong as compared to these team comps. And that is okay. Because at the end of the day, Ruan Mei herself as a unit, she technically did give you the value back when you pull for her and the team comp that you constructed with her. And there's a reason why for across both EN and CN, the whole Super Break archetype is the most used archetype for every single community because it was brain dead, it was quite literally broken, it was very easy to build, and a lot of players, especially free-to-play players, had access to units like Harmony, Trailblaze, and Gallagher, which makes this team very, very free-to-play friendly. So I would say this Ruan Mei Fallacy, don't take it as a way that, okay, Ruan Mei's value, or rather her shelf life, has expired, right? This is the end of Ruan Mei. More like, take it as a lesson, as a perspective, where you can see that what happens when you want to pull a unit for their universal viability compared to a specialized viability. Because taking a look at it now, team comps, like I mentioned earlier, they would become more and more specialized. A units like Jiao Qiu, units like Tribbie Sunday, you know, all these different supports, whether or not they fall under the Ruan Mei Fallacy, it really doesn't depend on their kit personally, because Ruan Mei's kit had no change and she worked wonderfully for like the longest time. It really depends on what sort of team comps are going to be coming up in the future going forward. Because if we are going to be having a Super Break, which basically made all the other team comps back then a lot weaker, the same thing happened for follow-up. Fei Xiao with Robin cleared a lot faster, and a very similar thing happened with, you know, Aglaia, D-Herda, Mighty is gonna happen, Castry is coming out in less than like 3 weeks. My point is, team comps are basically endless. The reason you build up a team comp in order to tackle an ending content, this shouldn't be a way which players structure their pools, their supports, their DPSs. Because endgame content, it keeps changing. Team comps, brand new limited 5 stars, they will always keep changing. The only thing that doesn't change is that you have spent the Stellar Jades needed to procure these units in the first place. And if you spend them for the sake of clearing endgame content, you come to realize quite quickly that after a couple of patches, they would always never perform as good as they once was, because brand new endgame content, brand new archetypes, they will keep releasing, right? So this Ruan Mei Fallacy, at the end of everything, players should start to, you know, get a better understanding of what to expect when you guys want to pull for supports, especially supports. Because a saying has been going on where supports are like future-proof, right? Supports are future-proof. This is Honkai support real. At the end of everything, you're basically building a team around your supports. But because we only have 2 teams, 4 units, most of the time it's 1 DPS, 2 support, 1 sustain, 2 DPS, 1 support, 1 sustain, or if you want to run sustainless, then you just spam all of your supports, right? Usually for these cases, you will come to find that you will run out of slots, right? There isn't enough demand to justify pulling for all these different supports. And at some point, you will need to finally settle down and lock in on a specific archetype, especially in my opinion, for free-to-plays and low spenders, because you simply cannot keep up with the number of banners that are coming out. More banners are more frequent than Stellar Jades per patch, especially if you lose your 50-50s, right? So this narrative that supports, they are immune to power creep, they are immune to future proof, you can use them for basically forever, especially in a gacha game. I think as of version 3, I can personally for myself say quite confidently, this is no longer the case. This Ruan Mei Fallacy has happened. It is happening right now. Technically, it did happen for even units like Sparkle, because you can see with the release of Sunday, Sparkle usage is not going to be doing too good. And who is to say after 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, 6.0, all your old supports right now, Robin, Jiao Qiu, Sunday, do you think they will still retain a similar value in this current time frame compared to 2 or 3 years down the road, when I don't even know what sort of team comps are going to come out by then? And if brand new team comps are coming out in HSR, wouldn't you say it's more likely that they'll release even more synergistic supports to go with these even more incredible team comps, which would then be brought up by even more synergistic endgame content to make these new team comps feel even more powerful than they are? And this cycle, in my opinion, it will repeat forever. Alright, nobody is immune to having a forever shelf life in that sense, right? I think you can still use them, right? They can still be viable, but if you are a player thinking that a unit will always perform to the best of their abilities for the rest of their lives, especially if you think that this doesn't happen in support, then I would say that this Ruan Mei Fallacy is a pretty good way to, you know, reflect a little bit, manage your expectations, and know that despite somebody that, you know, you want to focus on supports, you shouldn't use that as the end-all be-all, thinking that they will be the best of the best for the rest of their lives. Same thing happens for DPS, same thing happens for sustains, and I do believe that this same thing would be happening for support, especially when we see future more and more crazy team comps like Castris, right? So, give an example right now, right? For so far, every single one of these version 3 DPS we've seen, D Herta, Agleia, Mighty, Castris maybe, all these different DPSs, not a single one of them has Ruan Mei has their optimal support. It could be viable, you could choose to use Ruan Mei, but Ruan Mei will never be the optimal support for them, right? You have more optimal supports in the form of Tribbie, in the form of Sunday, heck, even in the form of Bubbin, or even RMC, which is technically a free unit. My point is, because these brand units never would use Ruan Mei as their optimal support, players seeking for these team comps shouldn't be expecting the best of the best, the most optimal results in the endgame content. Because this is sort of the nature of how HSR is developing. And the only way I can see where we open up more jobs, right, more demand, is if they either introduce 3-team content, which I think is going to be, in my opinion, the best fix to all these kind of things, or more ways where it incentivizes players to dig up these old team comps, which is no longer able to compete with these new team comps. Since at the endgame content you only need 2 teams, there is very little reason for pretty much anyone to use all these old team comps like Blade, DOT, Jingliu with like your Ruan Mei, all that kind of stuff, when you could just use like the latest team comp anyways, right? So this is gonna be the Ruan Mei Fallacy. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, because I think this is quite interesting, especially when this video goes out, we are right before the HSR 3.2 live stream, right? So word of the day is gonna be Ruan Mei. Join Twitch, join Discord, join Twitter, all the words. See you guys next time. Take care.